you so much.
Okay, that's great. And so, hi everyone, thank you. First, I want to apologize for not being able to have the workshop yesterday. We had very unfortunate circumstances at work, and so I had to fill in for a colleague, but I'm out today, so I think we're good. So, what we will do about the slides is this, right? I'm going to take this workshop topic by topic. And then at the end of the workshop, I would have OC my notes that I'm using, and then they'll be able to make it to a slide and share it for everyone. So now that that is set, let's move into the topic. I'll be monitoring the chat as well for questions. I'm joining in on my other device so I can monitor the chat a bit more effectively. Um, so now that is out of the way, let's go to the topic for today. We have to deal with debating soft motions and evaluating psychological moral values and value judgment. These are important topics that I want you to understand by the end of the workshop. I think it's just a few things. The first thing is you need to realize that these moral concepts we are about to deal with today are not universally applicable. What it means in effect is they may apply in some instances and they may not apply. We'll get into it when I'm talking about context in relation to values. I think the second is debating such motions that have neither right or wrong conclusively require you to have a certain level of open-mindedness. This is something that is usually very difficult because we have
Hi, is it?
even into that why we have our opinions when we are talking about our psychological and moral makeup, and then we hit on value judgment. And so, um, first thing in here, then let us talk about soft motions very briefly. So, soft motions are motions that are soft in that they do not require a, a specific field of knowledge to act. So, for example, if I say that we believe Google Meet is an efficient video conferencing app, it is neither true, it's neither false. All you need at best is an experience to with Google Meet, and then you would be able to get into contact, right? And so that's how these motions are. They're usually about very popular social issues. They're usually about issues that have been debated over and over again. And so they are very, very accessible most of the time, especially to new speakers. Where will you find soft motions? These are motions that are usually taught to novices in their training sessions, or even in majors or big tournaments. Soft motions are usually set in round one, round two, when the tournament is starting, essentially, to make sure that we set up a good mood for everyone to participate and make sure that the tap draws out fine. These are where you most likely find those motions. How do we go about debating soft motions? To go about this, we need to take a full on journey circle. And when I say that, I mean we should get to the end of the workshop and then we'll be able to come right to the beginning, especially because soft motions are usually about psychology, philosophy, moral values, and ultimately value judgments. And so this is mostly analysis motions, belief motions. These are the kind of motions where you would have these things happening. So support motions. There are a few soft motions on policy, but they are not as popular as soft motions on the other side. Let's talk then about moral and psychological values. First, on psychological values. So, your psychological value are usually things that your mind conceives and the way that you perceive them. And so, your mind can conceive a lot of things, but they may not be things that you most likely think about in a positive light. So, for example, you may be in an environment that forces you to think about certain things that may be pleasant or uncomfortable based off of where you are. So, case study, imagine you go into a town where you are with the ruler of the town, and then you have a lot of resource, and so you enjoy, especially at the detriment of people. And so let's say you are in an old century tower, and then you see that down there are paupers crying, begging for food. You are in a psychological space ordinarily of comfort because of where you are, but the sight of other things like people begging for resources right under the same um, conditions or in the same geography makes you really, really uncomfortable. And so your psychology is not just what you think about, but how they affect you and how you run through your life. What then makes our psychology? Why are we even discussing this? I have found in many years, right, that discussing how we came to have certain things as part of our psyche, how we came to have certain things as part of our moral values is good for um, first self identification and knowing more about yourself. But since we are debated and most likely do not care, what this is good for is being able to understand what people who are most likely recipients of policy would most likely think about that policy, and to be able to get how, say, black people would react to new gun laws, or say what K-pop fans would react to K-pop Afrobeats, for example. You need to know what makes up the minds of these humans. And that is how you are able to make a right prediction in policy as at what needs to be done for these people if you have a debate. So the first thing that affects your psyche is being born, essentially. There are two schools of thought, right? The first school of thought, which is more popular but also more recent on the comparative, is that people are tabula rasa. And so people are not born knowing anything. People are not born with any ideas, with any preconceived notions, and they are at best a function of their environment. I think we could go on to discuss briefly why it is a good way to think about people. So, first thing is first advantage. It emphasizes responsibility on people who are duty bearers to young people and children. So, if we have an idea that nobody is born bad and people are just a function of the environment or the kind of parenting that they um, go through. What you have more and more is we emphasize more on pedagogy. When I say that, I mean like teaching children, relating with them, stuff like that. And this is something that is most likely a good thing to the extent that it makes children
Hi, Kevin, you are muted
right.
on that
I
device.
think I'm audible now.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so so what was the last thing I said before I got muted? Um, let me check the chat.
Kevin, you were talking about school of thought. You were mentioning the 3 points, and you were on the first point.
Okay, I don't know. My previous device has had my meat turning off. Oh, okay, I think the camera here is not so bad. So I had to change over. Um, I think it's better now, right?
No issues at all, yes. But your camera is a little bit shaky, that's it. I mean, it's turning off and on. That's it.
Yeah, I think it's a permissions
I mean,
problem.
you were visible for a while right now.
Okay. Um, I think it's my camera switch. I will just try to see for the last time. Am I visible now?
It's again full black. The camera is on, but it's full black.
Uh, I don't know. I think this might be a software issue. I may not have enough time to um, go through everything.
Can you reconnect from the old device that you were using right now?
Yes, I'm trying to reconnect now.
Yeah, you joined from that device. Camera is also on.
Okay.
You are muted on that device, Kevin. Kelvin, sorry.
Oh yes, I guess we are good to go now.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry for the inconvenience, guys.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So once again, the last thing I was had saying.
You are on the school of thought.
Yes. So the first school of thought, which is the most modern one, is the tabula rasa. Um, it means people are clean sheets of paper. I think I talked a bit about how it means that people who are responsible for children are supposed to be a bit more cautious about how they go about their activities, and so it places a lot of responsibility on parents and people of the sort to be more responsible about their children and what their children do. I think the second advantage that had is that even for most people at the time that they grow up, what it meant is if they are to be involved in crime or any other unfortunate circumstance, we reason that they are not inherently terrible people. They are most likely just, once again, as victim of circumstance, or you could blame someone else, say the state, for being a bit irresponsible with handling the person and their issues. or the stories that they have gone through as a result of their background or state sponsored failure. This is something that is used to interplay with a lot of other things. So imagine I am born into an area where many people believe this idea that I am not born with any preconceived notions, but I am just an unfortunate victim of my environment, or say lottery of birth. In a debate about certain issues, you would need to draw in more things about the psyche of the person to make it more relatable and draw in some needed context from framing. For framing, what do I mean? The person may be born tabula rasa, but what does other narrative in their area say to them? So, for example, if the person is born in a religious environment where they say, for example, that everything that happens in a person's life is predetermined by God, and so they call it, say, determinism. How can that person reach a moral compromise as to which is actually true? Because if God or a deity determines who he is and what he would become, then he most likely is not a free man and was most likely not born tabula rasa. Unless, of course, the idea in the town that this person was born in is the free will, that people are born to do things in of themselves and on their own right. And so you do realize that that also brings a new narrative into the psyche of the person, the things they hear from people, and what those people believe. I think that in debates about very monocultural societies, it's very popular and straightforward what they believe in, but in very heterogeneous societies, it becomes very difficult to dive in. Because, for example, what another person may want to dive in is the idea of the afterlife and reincarnation. So, who knows? In some areas, I may be a version of, say, my dead grandfather or my dead grand uncle, and there are explanations those people may have culturally for that, including things like striking resemblances, striking mannerisms, including things like people being likely to take the same decisions or remembering very past events that should not have happened within the time that they were born, right? And so you realize that there are so many philosophies that people can and will engage with in their lives. What then is the sieve that makes these people decide eventually what their mental makeup would be? How do you prove it in a debate to a judge that, yeah, probably the person is Muslim and so it's deterministic, but we think this person most likely believes that there exists some free will? How do you tilt the scales in such debates, especially as, per my notice at least, judges tend to be intentionally or unintentionally, um, I don't want to use the word stereotypical, but they tend to be so. And this is how you realize when you give some analysis and they say, oh, well, I could not be sure who was telling the truth. It means there's a lot of competition, and the judge most likely takes what is most popular, right? And so let's then move on to how we would make the sieve to the judge of who is winning the idea of determining someone's moral psyche. This is a generic standpoint I'm giving you, and so it's not really dependent on it's really dependent on the debate, especially if the debate has a context slide. But without it, this is a generic version that I'm giving you that you can use. But before that, is there any question from anyone? You could just probably indicate. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I assume no one has a question. So let's go to how you sieve down what makes up a person's mental and moral psyche. The first thing is what's the most popular influence in their environment is. That's how you prove likelihood. So maybe the person is most likely going to be Christian because for someone to probably gain an education or gain some form of resource privilege, as at that time, historically, only Christians had them, and they were the ones people most likely listened to. That's how you are able to win over a judge with a popular rhetoric. Maybe you don't know that it is popular, but you know that at that time, people who identified with certain
Kevin, we lost you again.
okay, I saw that there was a question. Could that question be reposted?
Give me 1 second. There were two
Okay.
questions actually. First question was from Vedang Nahar. I'll post it right now. And the second question was by Aryan once you answer this. So basically, he says, can we really disprove absolute determinism because it sounds sort of foolproof? Hello, Kelvin, your system froze. Your previous system froze, Kelvin, and this is muted.
Okay. Just um, I think the messages can be sent to the chat again.
You you just joined right now, Kelvin, hence you can't see the messages. I will just paste it for them right now. So the first question was asked by Vedansh Nar. Can we really disprove absolute determinism because it sounds sort of foolproof? You're muted right now. You're muted. Kelvin, you're muted.
Okay, can we disprove absolute determinism? Absolutely, we can, right? Um, the reason it is very easy to disprove absolute determinism is this. The first reason is to prove determinism, you would need to be able to prove that the determinist factor really exists. And that determinist factor is a factor that many people cannot prove conclusively exists. And so, for example, to prove that determinism exists, you have to prove to everybody that, say, God exists. And that is very difficult to do. And so, with that in mind, there is no way you are going to be able to prove it very convincingly in the average or everyday debate, right? And that's why you're going to struggle to do that. But the second reason you can disprove it is to just prove that whoever would make such a decision is most likely going to be a stable entity, right? And so that stable entity, most likelier than not, is going to have, to some extent, a structure. And to the extent where people change, so like an addict could stop being an addict, it just becomes very difficult to prove that people determinism actually really works. The easiest way to have proven it would be if determinism rested on another actor, and that actor was, say, human, like the state. That would have been easier to prove, but even then, to prove determinism absolutely, you will need to prove to the panel that determinism is something that cannot be opted out from by any person, sort of like a destiny conversation, and that is very hard to have. Is there any other like question? The second one.
Yeah, there was a second question. I'll paste it right now for you. The question was from Aryan Chaudhary. He was asking, but how can we debate on any particular philosophy viewpoint when the criteria for judging the metrics of a debate is a utilitarian approach? Where are the stakeholders mostly benefited?
Okay, I think this is a good question. Um, except you can debate any particular viewpoint, move towards a philosophical standpoint, and that's where the advantage stems from. So some judges are practical and most likely utilitarian, and that's where the issue would come. But I think some debates structure around a lot of things that you could use to your benefit, especially in modern times. People have won a lot of debates using the minority, the vulnerable minority. And that's an easy way you can scale off of. And so, um, while you can say that many people would benefit on one side, I want to give a motion that is really stuck. Yes, the motion about giving tax cuts to women, there's a lot of good analysis as to how a lot of women would benefit from this, blah, blah, blah. During that time, it's a pretty old motion, so it may not apply now contextually, but a lot of work was done to prove that there are minorities within the women's sphere, i.e., women that do not have jobs that require them to be taxed, and these women would not benefit. And so there was a lot of work done then to prove that what would work for women is most likely general cut across subsidies and not just tax cuts for women engaging in the formal sector. Of course, you could have a back and forth about who is more, who is less, depending on the country. And so such debates are also country to country specific. So in the Western debates that I watched, you had a lot of people defending
um, it's very easily that there are more women in the formal sector in America than in the informal sector. But in Africa, for most countries, it is the reverse. And so, even then, you still get an advantage by proving less people are more important through this. A, vulnerability. And that vulnerability is proven in two ways. A, inherent vulnerability that is caused. Okay, I'll send the links after. Um, the first thing is inherent vulnerability, and that's vulnerability that is caused by a previous incident that had happened to people. Say, sorry, trigger warning, slave trade, genocide, stuff like that. That makes them inherently vulnerable, because it means that during the period they could not get certain means to gain access to certain basic rights and stuff like that. The second thing you could use to prove is external vulnerability, and that vulnerability is vulnerability of proving that these people do not have a choice, right? And so, if you do not do this for them, there is no way it is going to be possible for them to get this benefit. And so, let's say um, you could prove that women who work in the formal sector most likely um, could survive on their own anyway. They earn a lot, right? But women who do not may not have as stable a source of income, especially as their income is vulnerable to many shocks. And most of them probably live in the rural areas of the country that the state has most likely neglected. And so it is probably wiser to focus more on the people who are in the informal sector. And so that's how you are able to prove it. Even if there are less people, they don't have any other choice. If you don't do this for them, the propensity of anyone caring about them and trying to do it for them is probably very low. And that's how you're able to um, get over the utilitarian perspective. I think the third thing then would be using a categorical moral imperative, i.e., if we have wronged some people in the past, it doesn't matter that there are fewer people left now and more people need housing. And so maybe you are having a resettlement debate. It doesn't matter that, oh well, there are some other people who need housing. No, they don't need it as much as those who have previously had their housing taken care of them and taken off of them. And that's how you find ways to prove it. Just prove vulnerability, and then you should be fine. So I think we had first talked about the ideas about how necessarily people need to have certain things shape their psyche. And I talked about the fact that the first thing probably is the most popular narrative um, in their time, or and this is something that is spread by who has the most influence. And it is something that you may not be able to always accurately prove, but I think you will not be so far off in trying to guess that it most likely may be true. So I'll give an example. In a regular debate about Indian politics, I may be wrong, but in an average debate, as someone who is not most likely interested in um, Indian politics, I may say, well, Modi is a very successful Indian politician, and so most likely sets the tone as to what the average Indian um, politician thinks and what they most likely represent, especially because that's what it seemed to work, or most likely that people believe Modi, right? And so it means that I could, to some reason, assume that his ideas are probably very popular among the Indian people. Of course, there are a lot of ways to rebut it, except that this is most likely your best approximation as an average person. And an average judge is most likely going to buy that in a debate. So then, um, the second thing is what people did prioritize at that point in time, assuming it's a contextual time bound debate. So, for example, there were times where people preferred a lot of children um, because they would be given more land if they had more children, or they could engage in certain unethical marital activities to make better benefit of their children, or they say needed their children for labor, and so that affected a lot of things like who you want to marry. You most likely want to marry somebody who is strong, as opposed to now where you most likely want to marry someone with the most money. You may not really care about their genetics, and so that is also something that you would want to think about in the space of time. And so probably those days where women were only respected because of the number of children they have, the average woman's priority would be to have children, right? And then be able to show something for her womanhood. But now that women have jobs, now that women have ways to actualize, they don't really care if you need a firstborn son urgently or not, because they are able to gain resources on their own, even without the institution of marriage in the first place. That's also how you are able to get into the thought process of a person, right? You are able to think through what's the end, and secondly, what's most likely they would see as an obvious benefit within the conversation. The second thing then we would want to get in is how we are going to deal with value judgment debates. That is where most of the conversations are. For the purposes of the workshop, I don't think it is beneficial to take you through the advantages and disadvantages of, say, utilitarianism or Kantianism. I think that is information that is mostly very accessible at this point in time. What people really need and what we will delve into this workshop about is how to use these things very, very efficiently when you're arguing about value judgment. And so I'm going to use final motion for 2024. It's around I lost. And so, yeah, I'm not going to give you a round. I want to try to flex it. Available on Facebook. But I think it's no on YouTube. But I think it's available on Facebook. Anyhow, anyway, I'm going to send a link to Ocom. The motion was this house welcomes the end of work. And so we're going to go through the thought process together as being Gov and being up, how we were able to end up as runner-ups on a very close split. The first thing you do in a value judgment around that has to do with what people um, think, and what people think most likely affects the actions that they are going to take if certain phenomena happens. And so, for example, somebody may be in a very marshy land, right? And in that marshy land, they may struggle with, say, getting crops, um, because the land is just wet anyhow, anyway. There's no real structure for them to go about their activities. But if we were to say, for example, that this person expected rain because it hadn't rained in a while. Because rain is probably a sign of goodwill from their deities. This person, regardless of how the rain hurts them, would be fine if there is more rain, even though the wetness of the land is something that is not necessarily advantageous all the time to that person. And so, how we went about this is to first cast a moral judgment on work itself. That's the first thing you do in a value judgment debate. For every structure of the debate, the first is welcome, because this house is welcoming a situation, and that situation in this instance is the end of work. You need to ask yourself, what does the end of work first in and of itself look like? But again, what does it mean to welcome a phenomena? The easiest way to save yourself time is simply to think about the thought process of the other side. It is something that we most likely do not want to spend time doing, but I think that's the best way to go about a soft motion. It is a soft motion for a reason. It most likely has a very clear command with very clear reasoning, and you should not allow your the person on the other side to be the one to bring in the first offensive in terms of argumentation. You should have the upper hand and you should allow the person on the other side to bring in the first offensive. If you do that, you will
Hi, Kelvin, you're muted again. Can you check? Thank you.
okay, yes. So, all right. So, once you're able to get into what the other person most likely thinks about the phenomena, you can be able to make your own standpoint. So, what we were thinking at that time is the defense for working is most likely going to be first money, right? I think for the average person, we don't know any other way to make money apart from working, having a job, having a trade, stuff like that. And so it means that the end of this phenomena for the average person would mean that this person would not see any other way to make money. I think what you need money for is largely personal, but you will most likely know what money is used for anyway by different groups of people, stuff like that. It means that what we then had to do is to act like a perverse person on Tinder. So their psychology is the best psychology to win value judgments debate. It applies elsewhere as well, but just be with me on this. The first thing you are going to use to get an advantage is if the person wants something, can you give it to them? So let's say you want to win um, SMVIT and I want to be your teammate. The first thing you are going to ask is if I can get you the trophy through a means that is probably assured, because that's what matters to you the most at the moment. at that point, whatever you need the trophy for will most likely not matter to you. All you know is that you need it. So, what the person wants at that point, can you give it to the person through another means? But that is not the point where you win a value judgment debate. If you are able to say that, for example, well, without social media, people can still get news that is credible of, say, news sites or blog sites or on TV. Many times, we make a rookie mistake of thinking that once we have provided another way to provide the utility for the people that are interested, we should win the debate. And that's why you get angry when we don't, because you say, oh, I also provided an alternative. It is not enough to provide an alternative reason, especially because most likely the judge knows about it already and the other speakers do. What you then do in such a debate is to first, after at best proving that there is non-exclusivity, prove why there is still a bigger nudge to one side. When I say a bigger nudge to one side, using the motion we have, what we then proved secondly was, well, people want money and that's why they are working. We can give them money by centralizing and automating state systems and then processing to give them UBI or universal basic income. It means then that people have money, and you cannot say that well the end of work will be bad because people cannot make money and stuff like that. People will make money. That money will most likely be on an equitable basis until there'll be some kind of equity spread out in the world. It's a good idea. But if people work and gain money and you centralize system and give them money, it's most likely money, right? But you're not still winning because Gov can still say or up in that instance that those who work really hard will not get to make more money to the extent that those who do not really work hard in the past or have never really worked hard, do not have any skills, nothing like that, would still earn as much as they do. And so probably there'll be less reason to make the world a better place because you won't receive any recompense for it. And so you realize that all these challenges means that there's more you have to do to win than just saying we also have their impact. We also serve this group of people that they serve. How do you prove it? The first thing is ease of access. So maybe um, it is easy to get food from your favorite restaurant by going to beg if you are broke, but it is probably easier to ask to do the dishes for the day in exchange for a meal. Even though that will require a bit more effort, it still gives you a higher chance of getting it. And that's one way you are able to win over a judge. Ease of access of your utility. So we're like, there's so many reasons people cannot work, so many reasons people do not have skills. Some caused by the state, some probably not caused by the state, but not caused by the people either. And so these people, by the virtue that they're human, still need to get some way of surviving anyhow, anyway. What we give them through UBI is money that they can get very easily, very quickly to make their lives better and provide for their families. Also, then means that every adult has a chance, and so families have their dependencies reduced to the extent where people um, might not have jobs in some areas. And so in some areas, not that people don't want to work, they have the skills, but they don't have an industry that is willing to take up um, their skills and give them work to do. Once you are able to provide ease of access, assuming you are able to correctly predict by preemption, like we talked about in the debate, that this is something that the other side also cares about and an impact that they also want to get, you are able to get ahead of them. The second way you win such debates is to be able to prove to a very large extent that this judgment is something that people are most likely going to gain some happiness about. It's a lot of work to prove if people would essentially be happy or not, right? But I think that essentially you can do it in a few ways. The first way is, why does happiness matter so much? Even the second way is to prove probably this is something they will be sad about, but they will get other things to be happy about. How is this something that you are able to prove very easily that people get joy from it? I think you go back to the previous things we discussed. What makes up people's psyche? What is moral to them? And that's because in many areas, doing what is seen as moral, what is seen as right, is the way to gain some form of acceptance, some form of recognition that people want. It means even if they may not agree with it or they may not be happy about it, they may be happy about the idea that people would respect them for it. So many of you are most likely reading a course you care nothing about in the university because, well, your parents will be proud of you in the end, and you most likely want that. And so you hate your lecturers, but you see that your parents are happy anytime you hit that A, or anytime you are called for a school award. You are able to balance that that you give people through a new phenomenon is most likely something that you can get directly or indirectly. And that is, you can prove that probably people would be happy on their own internally, but to a very large extent, people would want to use their families or the people they care about the most as their yardstick for being fulfilled instead of their personal priorities, especially for people who have a lot of, let's say, societal expectations on them. So, for example, a first degree college student who is also a first generation college student from their home or from their community, this person most likely has a lot of pressure on them, and they most likely do not care about what happens to them because their family say sacrifice so much for them and they don't want to let them down. That's how you are able to sometimes say you are taking away personal happiness that they can also get communally. The third reason you can give for why you win a value judgment debate is just what is right to do and not what is easy to do. That is sometimes very hard to do, admittedly, especially if you put into contact, if you put into context that there is an actor. So let's say that actor is the state. Let's say that actor is a parent, and that person has some priorities that they want to most likely meet to say their children, you know, stuff like that. They have people that they most likely want to care about. How you want to go about such debate is to first take those people into a very specific context. So if there's a state debate you're having, you want to take the state into some context and see what is right for that person to do. How you go about this is to, depending on the debate, take what they most likely would want to do, especially if it's an actor debate and you want to prove precedent. That's one easy way to win an actor debate. That this person has made such decisions of a sort many times in the past and they will most likely make it down. The second way you can go about it is to probably prove that this is something that they should do, an action that it is important for them to take, given the situation that they are in. And so it is a right decision to make, and that is what we must stand for. And so some impact you can use to justify to the judges if you want to take what is right to do. First, that you promote a sense of justice among the people that are affected. Second, that the actor involved probably feels at peace internally. But if you are not on the side of what is necessarily right, but what is easy to do, of course, I say this in context that this is something that is most likely probably generally frowned upon, like unfair resource, distribution. Not something that's very big or serious. You get what I'm saying? And so if it's something that is bad, let's say unfair resource allocation, what you could most likely use to justify that something is easy to do is A, that yeah, more people benefit. And so if more people are benefiting, those who deserve the actual truth or the actual resources may riot. But there are not so many people anyway. And so would rather have fewer people riot than more people riot. Especially as even if you think it is right to give less people the resources because they rightfully deserve them, you would still spend more resources anyway to contain a larger amount of people who are angry about not having this. And so you are able to prove that what is right to do may not necessarily be the best thing to do, especially as it may lead to um, more and more terrible outcomes for people. Um, I could give an example of this, but I ran at a risk of being a bit graphic, so I guess I'll skip that. The last thing then you do about a value judgment debate, and this is very important for being memorable in the judge's mind, is to set a very comprehensive actor analysis of all the actors in the debate and who they will most likely care about and what they will most likely want. How do you do this? You do this through a lot of intuition pumps. Imagine you're a young Indian schoolgirl. Imagine you are a first time election winning congressman. Imagine you are um, a black elite. Imagine you are an educationist trying to teach students who care less about you and care more about AI. Or say, imagine you are a boy born into a patriarchal society. Most of the time, the principles we discuss are very obvious in terms of what they mean. And so if you are going to have a long chat about, say, determinism, I know what determinism is, and most likely I'm not too concerned. The way you catch the judge's attention is to move through how each and every person is is catered for on your side, especially the people that the other side cares about. We need to realize that it is Asian parliamentary. There's no closing team here. The other side is very specific. And so, especially in your replies, you want to make sure that after your earlier speakers have gone through this thorough stakeholder analysis, because you cannot bring new material, what you can do is to go through a replay of the debate that reminds the judges about what your team has done to serve the actors that were mentioned in the debate. Is it necessary to have a major grasp of certain philosophical topics to be able to debate? Um, no. In my experience, many people who know a lot of philosophy, even though they have won a lot of debates on philosophy, have also lost a lot of debates on philosophy. What you need to do is to ask yourself a simple question. And that's the way I've wrapped my mind around philosophy personally. Why would someone think like this? I know it's a bit of a funny question, but just ask yourself, why would someone think like this? Why would someone think this is right? Most likely, they want something, right? There's something that they want to get, and they think that this is the only way they will get them. So, sorry, this is graphic, but why do some states have the death penalty? Why do they think someone should have their life ended for ending another person's life? Because they want something. What they want is someone seeing this and stopping what they intend to do if it's evil, because the circumstances are really dire or the impact is really dire if they engage in such an act. It may not be effective, but that's the whole point of philosophy. There is no philosophy that is open ended. They all have a certain end to them. And so once you find out, maybe in a Kantian world, if I kill your brother and you kill me, it is wrong. Why? Because killing is wrong. No matter who does it, no matter what the reason is, it is wrong. And so maybe after that time, those people just wanted a world where nobody did anything bad to anybody. Especially because once you say some things are wrong, but they can be right under some circumstances, the one who has power decides to use them how they want. But maybe the one who says, well, utilitarianism, let's see, maybe ending the life of a bad person is bad, but that person most likely would have been an inconvenience to many more people. And so ending their lives means securing the lives of many more people. And that is fine. Why would the person think that way? Because they also want a certain end where people who were forced by certain situations to do certain things will not have the state punish them for it, because maybe those actions were not necessarily ill intended, even though they ended up in a negative way. So just think about it. For every philosophy debate, once you have the basics, what is the end? In a society that believes in this, what are they looking for? And that's the best way you can have it. The workshop has ended. If anyone has any questions, I will take them now.
The that you had missed. She had asked, like, can you send the Western debates you referenced to further our knowledge? And
Yes, I'll be sending them to you, OC.
yeah, sure, we'll forward it to them. Please register it on the Google form so we can email you directly. Second question was from Ahana Chatterjee. Is it necessary to have a major grasp over certain philosophical topics to be able to debate?
Yes, that was the question I had spent the last period answering. I'm saying that every philosophy has a conclusion, and so finding it is enough to debate because you know what the people are looking forward to by having such a philosophy. And then you can just make the debate about whether it's an effective way to get that end or not.
Cool. Do we have any other questions from anyone else? You can also unmute your mic and ask right now. I guess we don't have any questions for now, Kelvin, or should we wait for a few more mics? Oh, yes, we have one more. Can you talk about the certain
Okay.
loopholes to principles?
I'm waiting for the example. I think it will
Yeah,
make yeah.
yeah, sure. No issues.
Okay. I think per the example you are giving, it's more like an exception to to the principle, right? Um okay. So yes, I think I understand the question both ways in that some principles have loopholes and then exceptions are created for them. So for example, free speech is good, but a loophole is anyone can say shit about everyone and you cannot do anything to them because you're from for free speech. And so how do you exploit loopholes in principles? I think the first is looking at the motion. Certain motions task people to defend a principle in absolutism. It means that for that motion, once you find anything that is anti the goal of the principle, you can easily use it as a point of attack to the team that is having them. The second thing is to find a situation that is a very popular use of the principle, but is not that ideal. And so, for example, um, people say, well, you give your rights to the state so the state can protect you. But the state uses you to protect yourself, right? So whoever is in the military, whoever is a soldier, whoever is in the navy, whatever forces the state has, also needs the state to protect it. But they are ending up rather protecting the state. What does it mean to a larger extent? That in the wrong hands, this principle can be abused a lot by people who want to use it for their own greed. And so, for example, there are countries that really stress on patriotism and following the leader of your country as a sign of loving your country. It means that a leader that is not necessarily the best of leaders morally would use people for whatever ends they have, and there's nothing that can be done to stop them. And so I also think that your question is something that is very important in framing a debate. If you are not bound by the emotion, please and please again frame out the um, ungodly ways to use your principle, right? So if your principle is, say, utilitarianism, and you are supposed to defend a very uncomfortable comparative set to you by up, first frame to the judges that this is something that you cannot defend, especially because A, it's non equitable to do so, or B, the average person interacting with this principle will not interact with it in such a way. And so, yes, the people will use free speech to hate or say racist or ableist things about people. But the average person does not need freedom of speech, so they would be racist. They most likely need it for something more that has to do with their identity, their ability to exercise the right to voice out on displeasure, stuff like that. That's how you're able to take advantage of the loopholes that most likely this is what the average person wants. Because say hate speech is something that even if it's not illegal, it's something that people frown a lot upon. And so the average person, like we talked about, is most likely subject to the influences of the popular people, of the popular rhetoric in their spaces, the most proximate rhetoric. And so they most likely would not want to use those things. And so that's how you find a loophole in the principle. What is an ungodly way to use the principle or a wrong way to use the principle? If you want specifics for specific examples, we could go more and more into it. So we say, like, for example, ethnic minorities, right? So abuse and discrimination against ethnic minorities or racial minorities is always something that people use when you want to justify it with utilitarianism, or at least we benefit more people, or at least there are more people that are not Indian in an African classroom. And so caring more about the African kids is probably more important than caring more about the Indian kids. There are fewer anyway. Um, for, say, Kantianism, um, it's still the same, right? It's wrong to probably torture someone. And so when you catch a terrorist, let them go. Don't harm them. If they don't want to tell you anything, you shouldn't do anything to them, right? That's a wrong use of Kantianism. It was to enforce that morality is something that should be upholded at all times, and no one has an exception. But you realize that someone will do something terrible, and you have to do certain wrong things to get them in. So, for example, by a Kantian policy, if someone commits a crime, you cannot deceive them, for example, into admitting guilt. So you cannot entrap them with a police officer acting like a friend or a drunk dude at the club, because it is deceit, and deceit is wrong. So in as much as their crime is wrong, deceit is wrong. Until that person cannot or should not be held liable because you went through a wrong way to get it. And so I think that there's always that, and many times over time, you can argue that there's a mixed way around it. So, in some legal context, there are some forms of evidence that is seen as illegally obtained or tainted evidence. And so, that's somehow a way in which Kantianism still exists, but in sentencing, utilitarianism is used because we want to consider more than just the victim and see how the crime or that criminal affects general society. And so sometimes there's a mix to avoid either loophole, but every principle has a wrong way to use it. And that's how you guard against it or exploit it in a debate.
Thank you so much, Ree
Um,
and Kevin. Do we have any other questions?
Okay.
Cool. I guess we do not have the questions for now, Kelvin. If we have any, we will forward it to you and then get the response back to them.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So for everyone who registered, I will forward the notes that I have to OC, and OC will make it to a slide for all of you. I know it's late in your time now, so thank you for staying. All the best to everyone.
Thank you so much again, Kelvin, and thank you to all the participants who have joined us today for giving up your time. It was a very interesting session, right from the covering up the basics to the example to again a real life example of you, why you came up runner up. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you soon with another session. Till then, goodbye. Talk soon. Thank you.